Hello, my name is Karen Masters. I'm a professor of astronomy and physics at Haverford College, which is in near Philadelphia, in the outskirts of Philadelphia in the United States. As you might hear from my accent though, I grew up in the UK and actually was a Girl Guide for a lot of my childhood. I think from about 1988 to 1997, I was a member of the Guides. So it's my pleasure to make this video, Toys in Space, as an activity for your Under the Stars festival, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. Oh, and just before I start, I just wanted to show off my badges. I still have some of my badges from when I was in the Guides, and so I brought them along to have with me when I do this talk. Okay, so I got interested in the topic of toys in space a few years back when I was involved with the design of this doll, Stargazer Lotty. Lotty is a type of doll that's designed to have childlike proportions, and you can buy different Lotties with different outfits doing different activities. And this was the Stargazer Lotty that was designed. And you can see there an image from the company, and also I've got my very own Lottie who sits on my desk and keeps me company when I'm working. I was involved just to sort of check the scientific accuracy of this. We talked about the telescope, the outfit she was wearing, was she going to be warm enough for stargazing? The box that Lottie comes in also has an insert with some information about notable women in astronomy, which I checked over for accuracy. And there's a set of playing cards of the planets. And so, you know, we double check that they were all there and all in the right order and things like that. So that was fun. And then it was very exciting to hear a few months later that Lottie was going to go into space. This was an initiative with the European Space Agency, and Lottie flew up into space with the British astronaut Tim Peake. Now, this is obviously not a real picture of Lottie in space. This is something that was made as part of the promotional materials at the time. But here's a real image of a real Lottie doll in space. You can see she's in her box there, and this is a tweet that Tim Peake sent out from the International Space Station during his mission. This was in January 2016. So this was very exciting, and it attracted some press at the time. And so here is some of the press about Lottie being the first doll in space, particularly like the image of her in the astronaut suit there on the cover of the big issue. So I got really interested in the idea of toys and dolls going into space, and I wondered, you know, was Lottie really the first doll that had gone into space? I knew there had been an astronaut Barbie doll. I can't find any evidence that Barbie, the astronaut doll, ever actually went into space. And if you look at her outfit, she'd have some trouble if she did, because she doesn't have any gloves. So she would be exposed to the vacuum of space in this spacesuit, which is not good. But it turns out that there are lots of toys that have been in space. So here is Olaf on the International Space Station, which is rather lovely. Buzz Lightyear really went into space. So this happened in...
Yippee!
Wow, talk about falling with style.
Buzz, I can't believe you were actually in space.
Yeah.
So there's a nice video there. Angry Birds have been in space. So this was in 2012 when Angry Birds were just a computer game. And this is NASA astronaut Don Petit playing with some Angry Birds. Toys have even been made in space. So this is Satoshi Furukawa, who built this scale model of the International Space Station using Legos in 2011. Very meta to build the International Space Station while on board the International Space Station. Not just Lego, this astronaut, Karen Nyberg, actually made this toy dinosaur you can see here while she was in space. In 2013, she went up to space when her son was still quite young, and so she decided to make this toy dinosaur from materials she could find around in the space station. So that's rather nice. And then as I dug in further, I discovered that actually it's really, really common for toys to go into space with the Russian cosmonauts. It's a custom that the crew will hang some kind of talisman in their Soyuz capsule, and they will watch it as they launch. And it hangs down under gravity while they're on Earth, and then they can tell when they get into space when this talisman starts floating. So here we have an R2-D2. The next one shows some kind of hippo soft toy. Not quite sure what this one is, but some kind of stuffed animal. And there's really been quite a lot of different stuffed animals. Usually they're a toy that belongs to one of the cosmonauts' children or a family member, something like that. So it's quite a nice custom the Russians have there. And then it turned out that between 1985 and 2002, NASA had an entire mission that was called the Toys in Space mission. And a very large number of relatively simple toys flew in space on this mission. And there's actually a whole load of videos that were created in the 2002 mission, where 16 toys went that had also gone on previous missions on the space station. And then the science officer on board the International Space Station, who's called Peggy Whitson, is actually has the most space hours of any NASA astronaut, made a bunch of videos about these toys in space. So why would NASA have an entire mission about toys in space? Interesting, right? Well, maybe you might want to think about what's different about gravity in space. And if you're watching the video with your family or your friends, have a little chat about what's different about gravity in space. So someone might have said there's no gravity in space. And so we're going to investigate that thought. Let's just have a little watch of this talisman, one of these Russian talismans. This one does look a bit like a doll, little character here on the right. And if we play this,
T-minus 30 seconds and counting.
Watch the launch.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Turbo pumps at flight speed.
Liftoff. Liftoff of the Soyuz TMA-05M carrying Sonny Williams, Yuri Malenchenko, and Aki Hoshide on a 2-day journey to the International Space Station.
Skip ahead.
Talisman, that will be the first sign that the crew has reached orbit right at the 9-minute mark.
She's still hanging, you see.
1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight. Everything reported green, all looks good.
And when they reach space, that doll will start floating, as we discussed. And a lot of people call that zero gravity. But gravity is still there in space. It has to be, right? It's gravity that's holding the entire solar system together. The moon goes around the earth goes around the sun. And if it weren't for gravity, instead of doing that orbit, we call it, going around the sun once a year, the earth would instead keep just going off in a straight line and fly off into interstellar space. So it's gravity holding the solar system together, and there's gravity acting everywhere. I study galaxies, and this is a computer simulation of 2 galaxies that are interacting. They're moving towards each other over a period of billions of years. A giga-year is a billion years. So for this period of billions of years, these 2 galaxies collide with each other, and the stars in them get pulled out into beautiful shapes, all because of the influence of gravity. I'm going to show you how gravity works in space. This is a diagram which shows the Earth and the Moon and the force between them that holds them together, that holds the Moon in orbit around the Earth and stops the Moon from flying off into space. This force of gravity gets stronger when the masses get bigger. So the force of gravity that the Earth creates is bigger than the one that you and I create. And the force of gravity also gets bigger the smaller the distance is. So the further that you go away from the Earth, the smaller gravity does get, but it doesn't disappear. It never completely disappears. So what's going on in orbit? Okay, well, to answer that, we're going to have a little bit of a think about gravity on Earth. And this is where we're going to bring in some simple toys that flew on that NASA mission. So the first one of these is going to be a simple origami flipper. So let's just first watch a video of someone playing with this.
Origami flipper.
Okay, so this is a very simple toy. This is a toy that children have played with for thousands of years. And I'm covering over the website here, but at this website I've provided you with this printable sheet that you can download if you want to, and you cut out and make your own origami flipper. You can actually just use a plain sheet of paper, but I've put the instructions here which might be helpful, and see if you can make your own origami flipper and play with it. So maybe you want to pause the video now and do that, or maybe you did it ahead of time, or maybe you just want to think about what you just saw, the video of the woman throwing the flipper. And have a think, what happens when you throw the flipper? Oh, well, let's think about what happens when you throw a ball. And here's a picture of a little boy throwing a ball. When he throws that ball, we know that it'll go up for a bit and then it will come down. Gravity always makes things come back down to Earth. That ball is not going to fly off into space, right? We know that. What about if we kicked a ball? So here's a football player and she's about to kick this ball. She's going to kick it much harder than that little boy was able to throw the ball, I imagine. But still, we know that it'll go up for a while and it'll come back down again. That's what's going to happen. It's not going to go into space. But how about that rocket launch? That's a bit like throwing something up in the air. Instead of throwing it, we're using rocket boosters to make it move incredibly quickly upwards, but we're still kind of making it move upwards really, really quickly. And it will come down again because of gravity. But there's a really interesting thing. That rocket goes up so high that by the time it comes down again, it's gone around the curvature of the Earth. So instead of hitting the Earth, instead it goes into an orbit around the Earth. It keeps going around the Earth in this circle. And so here's a diagram of a rocket, and one of them, hasn't gone quite high enough, gone a bit higher, still coming down. Eventually, if you make your rocket go high enough, when it falls down again, it will miss the Earth because of the curvature of the Earth, and instead of hitting the ground, it will just keep going around the Earth. So it's falling. Everything is just falling. So instead of zero gravity on Earth, we should really use these terms. We can call it free fall. Sometimes people still call it microgravity or weightlessness. You don't feel any weight. And I want you to think about that idea of free fall a bit. And we can actually do that here on Earth. One famous way of doing it are these aeroplanes. This one actually is called the zero-G aeroplane. So they're even using that language, which I'm telling you is not quite right. This aeroplane is not going to go into space. What it's going to do is go on this really funny flight path where it will accelerate upwards, and it will go up, and you'll feel really heavy in your seat, and it will go over the top, and then it will fall. And all of the people inside the aeroplane are going to fall with the aeroplane. And while they're in it, they're just falling. They don't feel any force of gravity. They won't feel any weight. They'll be weightless, and they float around inside the airplane. There's really neat YouTube videos of a band making a music video doing this. And this was done by Lindsay, the Blue Peter presenter. So you might be able to find video of her doing it as well. Now, it's pretty unlikely that you'll get to go on one of these airplanes. I think I'd like to go on one day. But you probably have been in a lift. And when that lift goes downwards, sometimes you feel a bit lighter for a moment. You're feeling a little bit that sense of weightlessness. Or you might have been in a car that goes over a hill and you suddenly sort of feel a little bit weightless for a moment. The airplane just lets you do that for longer. And if instead of being in an airplane, you were in this rocket that was just constantly falling around the Earth in orbit, you'd be weightless for a very, very long time. And so that's the feeling that the astronauts have when they're in the International Space Station in orbit around the Earth. Okay, so let's go back to our origami computer, and we'll watch it on Earth again, and then we'll see Peggy Whitson playing with it on the International Space Station.
Origami flipper.
I deploy it with a forward flick of the wrist while holding the flipper between my fingers. Notice that it flips just like it does on Earth, but it rises upward instead of floating downward because of gravity's pull.
So it's going upwards because of probably air currents in the International Space Station. But the main point is it's not coming down again because it's in free fall with the International Space Station and with Peggy Whitson. So it just floats around. So there's some other toys. You might like football or soccer, as the Americans call it.
Soccer.
We quickly discovered that the whole strategy for playing soccer must change when there's no force to hold our feet to the ground and keep our bodies from turning. Using feet to pass is always challenging, but even more so in space where we can't stay on the floor. But sometimes the aim is great, and it's time to duck if you're operating the camera.
And I'm going to show you one more of these. There's a ton of these videos on YouTube that you can find if you want to watch more of them. I'm going to show you the spinning top, a very, very simple toy.
First, I use the top much like I would on Earth, and it works about the same until it bounces off the floor and starts to float. The top does not touch the floor as it spins, so there's less friction than on Earth. For this reason, the top spins much longer and remains stable. This gyroscopic stability definitely works. Next.
So Peggy mentions there gyroscopic stability, which is a pretty fancy word, but this is actually talking about the fact that this spinning top, this spinning object, is something that's used to stabilize and to let spacecraft tell their orientation in space. Because as Peggy was just demonstrating, a spinning top will always point in the same direction. So actually Tim Peake did this and did a lovely demonstration of this effect when he was on the International Space Station in 2016.
I'll just get this gyroscope here, and it's just a toy gyroscope really, but of course in zero gravity, if you knock it, it's going to tumble, it's going to move around like any object up here does. However, if I get this spinning, just give me a second. So once the gyroscope is spinning, you can just see how stable it becomes, and however I knock it, it's not going to change its plane. It's going to remain in the same plane. I can put it physically into a different plane and tap it again, but it will still hold that same plane, and it's much more stable. So it just gives you an idea of how we use spin stabilization and gyro stabilization for control on board the International Space Station.
So I thought that was a really, really nice demo of something that's actually really a simple toy, but that is essential to our ability to control spacecraft in space by using this effect that if you set something spinning, it's always going to point in the same orientation unless you apply a torque, so you're able to move it physically into a different orientation. Okay, so this was my Toys in Space, just a very short talk about toys that have gone in space. We have Lottie again here at the end, and I want to say thank you very much. It was my pleasure to contribute to your space activities for the Girl Guides and Brownies and all groups. If you want to see links to some of the videos that I've shown and also the download to make your own origami flipper and also a climbing bear type toy, you can see that website. And otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your activities.